My name is Avery Callahan, and I was 25 years old the night my parents took me to dinner to tell me I was nothing. My mother smiled when she said it. She smiled the way people smile when they've been practicing something ugly long enough that it stops feeling ugly to them. My father slid the papers across the white tablecloth like they were a receipt he needed signed. They had already made their decisions, already filed everything, already drawn the line. I didn't cry, I didn't speak for almost a full minute. But here's what neither of them knew. 6 months before that dinner, I had found the people I actually came from, and that night I had placed them 3 tables behind my mother's chair. She just hadn't turned around yet. What happened the moment she finally did is the reason I'm sitting here 6 years later, telling you any of this. Welcome back to Still Standing Stories, where we tell real, quiet, unflinching accounts of the moment someone finally stopped folding themselves small to fit inside a space they were never truly given. If you've ever had to earn love that should have been unconditional, this story is for you. Leave a comment below and don't forget to subscribe. Let's get into it. The restaurant was called Heliox, and I had never once been taken there in my life. My mother chose it. That alone should have told me something, because Carol Callahan did not spend money on me without a reason attached to the invoice somewhere. She wore the charcoal wrap she reserved for occasions that required witnesses. My father, Dennis, had made the reservation under her name, not mine, something I noticed when the host asked and he answered before I could open my mouth. There was no banner, no flowers on the table, no chocolate thing waiting in some back kitchen with my name written in frosting. For a birthday dinner, the table felt like a courtroom. The air between my parents had that particular quality, polished, careful, held just slightly too still, that I'd learned to recognize over years of sitting inside other people's worst moments. I work in trusts and estates. I've spent my professional life in rooms where someone is about to lose something, and I know what that air smells like. This air smelled like a verdict. So I did what I always do when a room turns cold. I found the exits, I counted the tables, and somewhere in that quiet assessment I clocked the small brass number resting on the table 3 rows behind us, slightly left, table 11. I held it in my mind like a landmark, the way you remember a corner before you've decided you'll need to find your way back. I set my own item down beside my water glass, a plain manila envelope unmarked on the outside. My mother glanced at it and I could tell decided it was probably a card, something I'd brought in anticipation of cake. She had no idea what was inside it. To understand why I wasn't surprised by anything that happened that night, you'd have to understand what birthdays looked like in our house. When I was small, my birthday was 1 candle, not 1 candle as a charming tradition. 1 candle pressed into a grocery store cupcake that Carol bought on her way home from wherever she'd been, left on the counter to go soft, forgotten until I reminded her. I watched it sweat while she took a call. 3 weeks later, my cousin Marcus, my Aunt Linda's son, got a catered backyard party with a DJ and a dessert table because Marcus was blood and blood got the desserts. I remember asking, the year I turned 8, whether I could have a party too. My aunt was sitting in our kitchen that afternoon, and she answered before my mother could. "We can only budget 1 big celebration a month, sweetheart," she said, and she said it kindly. That was what taught me the most about how harm actually works, how gentle a voice can sound when it's measuring your worth. So I learned the math early. 1 cupcake costs less than a party. A child who stops asking costs less than a child who keeps asking. By the time I was 9, I had stopped requesting cake because I could feel how much easier it made things for everyone at the table, and being easy felt like the only coin I had to spend. I didn't frame it as sadness, I framed it as efficiency. That's what happens when you grow up useful. You don't notice you've been assigned a price until someone reads it out loud. And across the white cloth at Heliox, 25 years old, I could feel my mother preparing to read mine. I left that house the week I turned 18 with 2 bags and a community college application I'd filled out entirely on my own. Nobody drove me. I worked nights behind a pharmacy counter and took morning classes, transferred to the state university, finished a paralegal program while waiting tables on weekends, and paid for every credit hour myself. I want to be clear about that, not because it makes me admirable, but because it matters to what comes later. Nobody handed me anything. By 25, I was a paralegal at a trusts and estates firm downtown, and I was good at it. I spent my days inside other people's wealth, drafting the quiet documents that determine what happens to a person's life once they can no longer hold it. Beneficiary designations, distribution schedules, the precise, invisible language that decides who eats and who doesn't for generations after the funeral. I could read a trust the way other people read a face. And the bitter joke of my life, the one I didn't laugh at for years, was this: I could construct an airtight boundary for a total stranger. I could walk a grieving client through exactly what they were owed, but I could not, for the life of me, ask my own family to choose me. The one exception was my grandmother. Every Sunday at 4 o'clock, without fail, through all of college and after, Grandma Ruth. She was the one Callahan who picked up the phone like she'd been waiting, who asked questions and actually listened to the answers, who treated me like a person rather than a line item. It was something Ruth said to me, just once, in her kitchen, years before she died, that turned out to be the hinge the entire night swung on. I was 12 and crying because Marcus had told me I wasn't a real Callahan. Ruth put down her dish towel, cupped my chin in both hands, and said the 11 words I carried for the next 13 years. "You were chosen, sweetheart. That means somebody wanted you on purpose." Then she made me a grilled cheese and let me stay up past midnight watching old movies. Ruth died when I was 23. 2 years before the dinner at Heliox, I gave the only eulogy that described who she had actually been rather than what she had left behind. Within a month of the funeral, my parents quietly moved out of their smaller house and into the larger one on Aldrin Street, the one connected to Ruth's name in ways I understood better than they realized. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was grieving. But Ruth had said something to me toward the end, her voice thin over the phone, that I filed away without understanding the full weight of. "I made sure she told me that you'll never have to ask anyone for your own life, sweetheart. I made sure of it." I thought she was being poetic, a grandmother telling her granddaughter to stand tall. It would take me 6 more months and a county records search I'd initially started for an unrelated client to discover she had meant it literally, in writing, notarized, with a bank trustee and a distribution schedule. The year before I turned 25, my family started going quiet around me. Not the comfortable kind of quiet, the coordinated kind. Texts that used to come back in an hour took 3 days. My mother stopped including me in the holiday planning chain. My Aunt Linda started using a word in the family group chat she had never bothered with before. Blood. As in, this is a blood-only weekend at the cabin. As in, we want to keep it close this year, family only. The cabin that slept 8, the family that suddenly had a membership requirement I didn't meet. I understood what she was communicating. What I didn't have yet was the document that explained why the temperature had dropped all at once, all in the same season, on what felt like a schedule. People don't turn cold on a timetable. Families drift, yes, but this wasn't drift, this was synchronized, and the part of my brain that spent its days catching irregularities in estate filings kept flagging it. The way 3 unrelated invoices arriving on the same Tuesday turn out on closer look to be entirely related. So when my phone lit up one March evening with my mother's name and a voice 3 degrees warmer than it had been in a year, I didn't feel flattered. I felt the small, cold click of something locking into place somewhere I couldn't see yet. "Honey," she said, and she only called me honey when she needed something to go smoothly. "We'd like to take you out properly for 25, the way we never quite managed." Every instinct built across 4 years of reading other people's bad news told me the same thing: this is too neat. I said yes, sweetly, the way she'd taught me. Then I hung up and sat at my kitchen table for a long time, thinking about timelines, about the house on Aldrin Street, about the word blood appearing in the group chat exactly now in this season, and about a sentence my grandmother had said before she died. And I thought about the manila envelope already sitting in my work bag, the one I'd assembled 6 months earlier, for reasons that had nothing to do with my mother and everything to do with finally understanding where I came from. I didn't call anyone to warn them, I didn't ask questions. I made a few calls of my own instead, the quiet kind, the kind you make when you've decided you will not be ambushed, you will be ready. I won't tell you yet who I called. But but I'll tell you the rule I've lived by since Ruth taught it to me without ever saying it out. Trig. Day. When Carol is generous, someone at the table is about to lose something. Make sure it isn't you. People assume a story like this is about money. I understand why. There's a trust somewhere, a house, an envelope laid across a dinner table. But sitting in the Heliox parking lot that night, engine off, both hands resting steady on the wheel, the thing I was afraid of losing had no dollar value attached to it. I was afraid of losing the last story I had about where I belonged. Because as cold as that house had been, as transactional as every candle and every handed-down birthday gift had been, it was still my origin story. They were still technically my parents. And if they cut that thread tonight the way I felt certain they had come to cut it, then I would be exactly what 12-year-old Marcus had told me I was. Not a real Callahan, just a girl someone picked up and eventually put down. That was the wound they were aiming at, and they knew precisely where it was because they had been pressing on it my entire life. What they hadn't accounted for was that the wound had already closed. 6 months can do that if the right people find you. I checked my reflection in the visor mirror, tucked the envelope under my arm, and walked across the lot with the particular calm of a woman who has read the last page of a book that everyone else in the room still thinks is being written. I wasn't walking into a disownment. I was walking into a goodbye I had already chosen. They just didn't know it yet. We ordered drinks before anyone said a true thing. My mother praised the wine list, my father told a parking story he'd already told twice in the car. And then somewhere between the bread basket and the entree nobody would end up eating, Carol folded her hands on the table and shifted into what I privately called her verdict voice. I knew that voice. It was the one she used when she returned a gift in front of me and explained calmly why it hadn't been worth the price. "We've always done our best for you," she began. Dennis nodded along a half-beat behind, the way he had followed her lead for 30 years. "We gave you a roof, an education, more than plenty of children ever receive." I let her talk. I rested one hand flat on the envelope beside my plate and watched my father's eyes find it once, twice, and pull away. The tab was visible just above my fingers. I had typed a label on it, and he could see 4 letters of it if he looked. He looked. I covered the rest with my thumb, not to hide it, just to let the wondering start to work on him. My mother kept going about sacrifice, about the cost of raising a child, about how a daughter should understand what she has been given, and I thought about a sweating grocery store cupcake with 1 candle and I said nothing at all. Then she set down her wine glass with the precision of a woman arriving at the slide she had spent the most time rehearsing. "There's something, Avery, you should have been told a very long time ago." She paused. She wanted the silence to do something. "You're adopted. We took you in as an infant. You were never biologically ours." She said it the way you announce a change to a dinner reservation, efficiently, with a practiced gentleness at the edges because she wanted me to receive it as care. And then she held very still and waited for me to come apart. I want to be honest, some part of me did. There's a floor a person braces for even when they know the floor isn't there, and for 1 second I felt the drop. But I had known for 6 months. The only thing Carol revealed that night was how little she actually knew about me. She leaned in, and she delivered the sentence I will hear in my quietest moments for the rest of my life. "We only kept you for the benefits." She smiled when she said it. That smile was the thing that freed me, not the cruelty itself. I had grown up inside that cruelty. The smile was new. A person doesn't smile delivering the worst news of someone's life unless they have rehearsed it so many times that it has become performance rather than confession. And in that smile, I finally saw the entire shape of the thing. I hadn't been a daughter who disappointed them. I had been an asset that had finished depreciating. My father attempted to explain it in accountant's language. There had been a small monthly subsidy when I was very young. He said something attached to the adoption government assistance payments gone before I'd reached middle school. There had been tax benefits after that. And there had been Ruth, my grandmother, he said carefully, had certain expectations about family. Adopting me had helped them meet those expectations, and meeting them had been, in his precise word, worthwhile for a good many years. I sat perfectly still and let the arithmetic of my entire childhood rearrange itself into its true form. The one candle, the handmade gifts Marcus's family returned and sent our way still tagged, the thermostat in my room that always seemed to run a little lower than the rest of the house. They hadn't been struggling financially. They had been pocketing the difference between what a child costs and what a child generates. And I had been the generator. "We invested in you," Dennis said, as if the phrase concluded something. And then Carol, growing impatient with his bookkeeping, delivered the final line, the one the whole evening had been structured around. "The subsidy ended years ago, and what came after it ends tonight. You're 25 now, Avery. There's simply nothing keeping this arrangement worthwhile anymore." She said it almost regretfully, the way you note that a warranty has expired. My father reached into the leather portfolio he'd brought, the one I had assumed held a birthday card, and slid a thin stack of papers across the tablecloth until the edge touched my plate. "We've already filed to formalize everything," he said. "You won't be named in the will, you won't be listed as a beneficiary on anything of ours. We wanted to do this face to face so there would be no confusion later." He had rehearsed the word formalize. I could hear the attorney who'd coached him in it. And here is the part I have never been able to make certain people understand, the moment that changed the entire temperature of the night without my saying a single word. I read the caption on the first page in approximately 4 seconds, the way I'd read 1,000 of them, and I saw immediately, cleanly, what they had done. They had filed against the wrong instrument. They had spent real money cutting me out of an estate that was, in the true accounting of this situation, almost entirely beside the point, while leaving completely untouched the document that actually decided everything. They didn't know what I knew. They thought the power in this room ran through their own modest will, and so that's where they had aimed their expensive little knife. I didn't correct them. You don't tell the opposing side they've named the wrong defendant, you let them finish. So I slid the papers an inch back toward the center of the table, neither accepting nor refusing, and I let them keep believing they had won. Across the table, my Aunt Linda's voice arrived from my mother's phone speaker, because of course Linda had been listening the entire time, because Linda had been the architect of half of this. "Blood looks after blood, Avery," she said, warm as a blade. "You've always understood that about family." I didn't cry. I want to be honest that a younger part of me had expected to. Some version of 12-year-old Avery, still living somewhere in my chest, had been bracing for exactly this table since the night Marcus told her she wasn't real. But 25-year-old me just lifted my water glass slowly and set it down without a sound. And I watched something move across my mother's face that I genuinely had never seen there before. Disappointment. Not at me, at the performance. She had written this scene with a different ending, and the person cast in the lead wasn't delivering her lines. "Aren't you going to say anything?" she asked. An edge had entered her voice, the brittleness of a woman whose script has gone sideways and who cannot locate the recovery. I considered it, the full flood of everything I could have said, 25 years of it, backed up behind one small dam. And then she made the mistake people like her always make. She filled the silence by reaching for the line that had worked the first time, expecting it to work again. "We only kept you for the benefits," she repeated slower now, pressing on each word, tilting forward slightly, trying to find a seam in me that would open. But a sentence loses its power the second time it comes from the same mouth. The first time it had been a revelation. The second time it was simply a confession and not about me. It told me everything about who she was and nothing about what I was worth. I smoothed my napkin in my lap, folded the edge once, and let her watch me not break. Behind her, at table 11, I saw a woman with my exact jawline turn her head toward our table and go still. To explain what was in the envelope, I have to take you back 6 months to the week 2 letters arrived and changed the arithmetic of my entire life. The first I had been waiting for. After Ruth died, I finally registered with the state adoption reunion database, half certain nothing would come of it. 8 weeks later, a letter arrived in handwriting I didn't recognize, careful and unhurried, the hand of someone who had drafted this many times before finally deciding it was time. It was from a woman named Claire Navarro. She wrote that she had been 19 when she gave me up, that she had not wanted to, that she had thought about me every March for 25 years, that if I ever wanted to meet her, any day, any distance, no conditions, no expectations, she would be there. She signed her name and then below it, she WR. Oh, one more line, the one I read so many times the paper went soft along the folds. I never stopped saving you a seat. The second letter came 3 days later. It had nothing to do with Claire, or so I thought. Our state had recently opened original birth records to adult adoptees once they filed through the reunion registry. I'd put in my request the same week Claire's letter arrived. While I was navigating the county system waiting on mine, professional habits sent me to pull the public record on Ruth's estate. And there it was. In the distribution schedule of the Ruth Aliner Callahan Family Trust, executed 2 years before her death, administered not through my parents but through a third-party bank trustee, a paragraph that rearranged everything. The caregiver distributions to Dennis and Carol Callahan shall terminate upon the beneficiary's 25th birthday, whereupon the remainder of the trust shall pass directly to my granddaughter, Avery. Not their estate, hers, held by a trustee they could not reach, scheduled to leave their hands permanently on the exact date they had chosen for that dinner. 2 letters in 1 week. One told me where I had come from. The other told me, in my grandmother's notarized hand, exactly what my parents were about to lose and why they were suddenly in such a very precise hurry. I did not call Carol and deliver the news at full volume. That was never the weapon I trusted. I have watched too many families lose everything to a satisfying outburst that a good attorney later repurposes as evidence. What I had was process, so I used process. I took a personal day, drove the trust documents to an estate's attorney with no connection to my family whatsoever, and paid her out of my own savings to confirm what I already suspected. The caregiver distributions were legitimate, ongoing, and ending on schedule. My parents had been drawing a monthly sum for raising me and living in the house the trust funded for the better part of 2 decades. The remainder on my 25th birthday passed to me through the bank trustee on its own terms that nothing my parents could file, sign, or shred would interrupt. Their will was irrelevant to it. Their disownment was theater performed on the wrong stage. My attorney asked whether I wanted to notify them, get ahead of it, soften the arrival. I said no. I said I wanted 3 things placed in an envelope, and that was all. The retainer letter so they would know I had legal counsel, the trust's distribution schedule so they could see the date in clean black type, and my original birth certificate with Claire Navarro's name printed in the mother's field so that when the moment came, the table would understand precisely which family I was choosing to leave and which one I was choosing to keep. I labeled the tab, closed the envelope, put it in my bag, and carried it for 6 months like an engine I hadn't started yet. The dinner invitation told me when to turn the key. I met Claire Navarro for the first time at a diner exactly halfway between our 2 cities, because she didn't want me to have to drive too far. That small consideration undid me more than any prepared speech could have. She was nervous. She'd brought a photo album she kept opening and closing without showing me, as though she hadn't yet decided she'd earned the right. She had my jaw, my way of going quiet when something moved me too much for words. Over those 6 months, we built something carefully, the way you repair a bridge while you're still standing on it. I learned I had a half-brother named Leo, 19 years old, all energy and questions, who texted me memes within the first week of being introduced as though I had always been there to receive them. I learned Claire's mother, my biological grandmother, a small and entirely formidable woman named Rosa, took one look at me when we met and said with complete certainty, "There she is." Like I had simply been late, not absent for a quarter century. They never asked me for a single thing. That was the part my nervous system kept failing to process. No favors to return, no role to perform, no math. Claire told me the 3rd time we met, the sentence that became the truest line of my adult life. "We kept a seat at this table for you, sweetheart. We never gave it to anyone else." And I, who could draft a flawless distribution clause for a stranger, who knew the precise legal vocabulary of belonging, sat in a vinyl booth and didn't know what to do with my own hands. Because I had been wanted for the first time by people who got nothing from wanting me. After 25 years of being useful, I had no idea how to simply be welcome. I kept testing them in small, ungenerous ways I'm not proud of. I'd cancel a plan and wait for the punishment. There wasn't one, just no worries next time. I'd insist on paying for everything to make myself worth the chair. Rosa eventually took my face in both her hands and said, "Why? Oh, don't have to buy your place here. We already made room." And slowly, over 6 months, something I had been carrying since I was 9 years old began, not to vanish, but to loosen. I began to believe, against all the evidence of my first 25 years, that a person could want me in the room without needing something in return. So when Carol called to invite me to dinner, I already knew exactly where I wanted to spend that birthday. I simply decided to spend it in 2 places at once. Here's who I called. The night my mother made the reservation at Heliox, I called Claire and asked her something I had never asked anyone in my life. "Will you come to my birthday dinner?" I explained the entire shape of it, my parents, the suspicions, the trust, the speech I could feel building. I told her I didn't know exactly what they planned to say, but I knew I did not want to hear it alone, and I knew I no longer wanted to perform the grief they were counting on. Claire didn't pause for even a second. "What time and what should we wear?" And then she said the thing that made me press my hand flat against my mouth in my kitchen. "We would be honored," she said quietly, "to watch you not need them." So I made one more call, this one to Heliox. I booked a second table for that same evening under my own name, Avery Callahan, party of 3. Table 11, the host told me, near the back, 3 tables behind the reservation already on the books for the Callahan party of 2 at the front. I almost laughed at the geometry of it. They had no idea they would be performing my disownment within eyeshot of the people who had been saving me a chair for 25 years. I told Claire and Rosa and Leo to arrive after us, to order quietly, to simply be there, and to let me cross the room to them when I was ready. I won't pretend there wasn't strategy in it. I wanted witnesses, and I'm not ashamed of saying so. I've sat inside enough private confrontations to know they always become the other side's word against yours. But Claire and Rosa and Leo were never just witnesses to me. That was the entire difference between what they were doing and what my mother was doing. The envelope was how I would make my parents understand what they had lost. Table 11 was where I would go to remember I had one long before they sat down. Back at the front table, my mother decided that the silence had lasted long enough and moved to close the deal. She produced one more page from the leather portfolio, turned it to face me across the tablecloth, uncapped a pen, and laid it across the paper like a small offering. "It's just an acknowledgement," she said, "that we've informed you, that you understand the situation. Sign it, and we can all have a civilized rest of the evening and go our separate ways." I looked at the page. I didn't need to read past the second paragraph. The release language opened with the exact boilerplate I had typed dozens of times myself. The undersigned hereby waives and forever releases any claim, interest, or expectation. It wasn't an acknowledgement, it was a waiver dressed as one. A tidy little document designed to have me agree on the record, before the shock wore off, while I was still absorbing the announcement, that I had been notified and held no claim. The kind of thing a careful attorney drafts specifically to preempt the challenge I was already positioned to bring. They wanted my signature while the wound was fresh. Classic, I had seen grieving people sign away significant assets at kitchen tables because someone slid a pen across at exactly the right devastated moment. My mother was counting on the wound. She didn't know the wound had a trust attached to it. I left the pen where she had placed it. My father across from me kept glancing at my envelope, and I watched the worry climb up his neck in a slow, unmistakable tide. Dennis had always been the one who understood where the money actually lived. He had seen the label on the tab. He was running the arithmetic now, the same arithmetic I had run 6 months before, and the answer was beginning to frighten him. "Is there," he started, then stopped. "Is there something we should know, Avery?" I gave him the first real smile of the evening. "Not yet," I said. That was when my Aunt Linda arrived in person, with Marcus following 2 steps behind, both wearing the expression of people pretending to be surprised while having clearly been waiting in the bar for a text. "Avery, what a coincidence," Linda said, pressing a cool cheek to mine. I understood the staging immediately. Carol liked an audience for her strongest performances, and she especially liked one that would nod along and apply pressure if the other person got difficult. Linda pulled up a chair without being invited. Marcus, 26 and still dressed in the particular way of someone whose mother still picked his clothes, gave me the look I had been receiving from him since childhood, the look that said, "Why? Oh, always knew you'd end up at the smaller table eventually." Linda got directly to her point because subtlety had never been her instrument. "We just want what's best for the family," she said, laying her hand over Carol's, "and families have to make honest decisions about who really belongs in them. You've always been such a sensible girl, Avery. You understand what blood means." There it was. That word, the one she had been planting in the group chat all year, finally spoken aloud at the table it had been engineered for. I looked at my aunt, the woman who had answered for my mother the day I turned 8 and explained to a child why she wasn't worth a party, and I felt the last thread of obligation I had been carrying for her simply go slack. These were not people I was losing. These were people I was setting down. I had carried them a long way, longer than they deserved, and my arms were at last gloriously tired. Across the table, my father was not joining in. He was looking at his hands. And then, underneath Linda's chatter, Dennis leaned toward me and said something very quiet, intended only for me. "Your grandmother loved you," he said, and then he stopped. For one moment I saw the alternate version of Dennis Callahan, the one who might have existed if he had ever once chosen the harder thing over the comfortable one. His eyes were wet, he had loved Ruth, that much was always true, and some part of him understood that the woman he'd loved had built an entire structure around me with her own money precisely because she hadn't trusted her son to protect me. That must have been an extraordinary thing to sit with at a dinner table. I waited, genuinely waited, because there was a version of that night where my father said the next sentence, where he said, "I'm sorry, this is wrong, I won't continue with this," and I would have heard it, and it would have mattered. But he looked at Carol, who was watching him the way a handler watches a dog that's drifted toward the road, and I watched him choose. He sat back, he picked up his water glass. The almost sentence died in his throat, where so many of his almost sentences had gone before. That was the closest anything at the front table came to love all night, 4 words and a swallow. I didn't hate him for it. You cannot hate a man for being precisely the weight you always knew he carried. But I understood, finally, the reason for the rushed evening, the precision of the timing, the expensive waiver. He knew about Ruth's trust. He had known the date was coming, and he had hoped desperately to get my signature on that release before I ever discovered what his mother had built for me. So I asked him a question, quietly, not as a daughter, but in the voice I use at the firm when I have found the flaw in someone's filing, and I am giving them the dignity of locating it themselves. "Dad," I said, "which instrument did you file under, your estate or Grandma Ruth's trust?" The table changed. My mother's wine glass stopped on its way to her lips. Linda's hand went still. Dennis blinked at me like I had begun speaking a language he half recognized from a country he had never visited, because in 10 words I had communicated 3 things they had not budgeted for. That I knew there was a difference between the two. That I knew which one mattered. And that I had known long enough to learn the vocabulary cold. Carol had never heard me use that voice. None of them had. To them I had always been the quiet one, the easy one, the girl who took the smaller portion so the table could stay pleasant. They had constructed this entire evening on the assumption that I would receive my fate, not audit it. "What?" Carol said, and it came out smaller than she intended. "What are you talking about?" I let the question breathe. I have learned that the most powerful person in any room is the one who does not need to rush toward the answer. I turned my water glass 1/4 turn on the cloth, aligned it with the edge of the envelope, and I looked at my father, who had gone pale, who already knew, who was silently asking me with his eyes not to open it. Then I opened it. No flourish, no theatrics, no slammed papers. I simply turned the envelope toward them and laid the 3 pages out on the white cloth, side by side, the way I would arrange exhibits for a client who needed to finally see their own situation clearly. The retainer letter first, firm letterhead, the unmistakable line confirming I was represented by legal counsel. The trust's distribution schedule second, the relevant paragraph already visible at the center of the page, in clean black type, for anyone at the table to read. And third, my original birth certificate, with Claire Navarro's name printed in the field where my mother had assumed her own name had always belonged. I didn't point at anything. I let the paper do the work paper does. My mother's eyes went to the distribution schedule first, because some animal part of her age. I'd always known where the real money slept. I watched her read it. I watched the words enter her. The line about the caregiver distributions terminating on the beneficiary's 25th birthday. The line about the remainder passing directly to her granddaughter, Avery. I watched her reach the word remainder and then the word Avery. And I watched the color leave her face from the top down, like a window shade being drawn closed. She looked up at me, then at Dennis, then back at the page, the way people do when they're hoping the second reading will say something kinder than the first. It never does. Mom, I said gently because I could afford to be gentle now, you filed against the wrong family. The one you cut me out of was always the smaller one. Carol is a fast woman and I'll give her that. It took her perhaps 10 seconds to assemble the complete picture and I watched her do it in real time. The house on Aldrin Street, funded by the trust she had assumed she would live in indefinitely. The monthly distributions that had quietly underwritten her comfortable life, ending by their own terms tonight. The remainder, the real value, the part she had spent 2 decades living adjacent to and never controlling, passing on this precise date to the daughter she had just announced she was finished with. And the waiver she had so carefully prepared, the one I had been seconds from signing, worth precisely nothing, because it released a claim on an estate that was never where the value had lived. She had aimed every resource she owned at the will and missed the trust entirely. The cruelty had been free. The mistake had been expensive. And here is where I learned the last thing my mother ever had to teach me. People like Carol never apologize at the moment they're caught. They pivot. Her face rearranged itself, the cold drained out and a terrible warmth rushed in. She reached across the table toward my hand. Avery, she said, and her voice had shifted into something soft and maternal in a way it had never been when it cost her anything. Whatever is in those pages doesn't change what we are to each other. We're still your family. The word family from the mouth that 20 minutes earlier had said, we only kept you for the benefits. I looked at her reaching hand. I did not take it. The same sentence that had been her weapon was now, in this light, the confession that cleared me to leave. People expect this is the part where I made them pay, where I enumerated the exact value of the remainder, watched them absorb it, perhaps ordered the most expensive thing on the menu and left them the bill. I understand the appetite for that. But I want to tell you the truth about power because I work with it every day. The strongest position in any room is not the one holding the largest number. It's the one that doesn't need the number at all. I had a career I'd built with my own hands. I had savings I'd earned behind a pharmacy counter and waiting tables and drafting other people's futures. I did not need Ruth's remainder to be free. That more than any dollar figure was what Carol could not survive understanding. So I closed the envelope. I gathered the 3 pages back into it, unhurried. I kept the pen they had brought for my surrender and set it neatly beside her plate. I had won the thing we were supposedly fighting over before any of them sat down. I had won it by knowing, by preparing, by refusing to be caught off guard. There was nothing left to argue. There was only the question of where to spend the rest of my birthday. And I had made that choice 6 months earlier in a vinyl booth, when a nervous woman with my jawline slid a closed photo album across a table and didn't ask me for a single thing in return. I stood up. I did it the way you'd stand from any table, no drama, just a woman pushing back her chair and reaching for her envelope. But the effect on the front table was immediate. My mother's hand was still hanging in the air between us. "Sit down," she said, and the soft maternal layer slipped and the old cold control came back into her voice like a bone settling. "Sit down, Avery. Where do you think you're going?" Linda straightened. Marcus, for once, stopped smirking. My father just looked tired, the specific exhaustion of a man watching the best thing his mother ever did walk permanently out of his reach. I picked up the envelope and held it against my chest. And I looked at my mother, the woman who had spent 25 years at various tables helping me understand that I had no real place anywhere, and I told her where I was going in the plainest words I had. "My birth family has been sitting 3 tables behind you this entire evening." I didn't say it cruelly, I didn't need to. The sentence had been true for the whole dinner, true while she rehearsed her lines in the car on the way here, true while she smiled and slid her waiver across the cloth, true the entire time she performed my disownment in this room. She had believed she was performing it to strangers. She hadn't been performing it to strangers. She had been performing it within arm's reach of the people who had been saving me a chair since before she decided I had stopped being useful. I watched the words travel across the table and land. And I watched my mother begin very slowly to turn around. She turned the way you turn when part of you already knows and is begging the rest of you to be wrong. The charcoal shoulders rotated, her chin came around, and there at table 11, 3 tables back in the warm low light of the restaurant were Claire and Rosa and Leo, who had been there the entire time, who had ordered quietly and eaten almost nothing, who had watched my mother deliver the worst sentences of my life and had held their seats and their composure because I had asked them to wait for me. Claire met my mother's eyes first. She didn't glare, she didn't perform satisfaction. She simply looked with calm, clear eyes at the woman who had raised her daughter on one candle and a ledger. And then she looked at me, and her entire face opened like a room with every window thrown wide. Rosa, small and entirely certain, had her napkin already folded by her plate and was ready. Leo had stopped looking at his phone. My mother's gaze moved from Claire's jaw to mine and back again, running the resemblance the way you check a sum twice when the number doesn't match what you expected. I watched the exact moment she understood that the family she had just told me I didn't have was sitting 15 feet behind her, in real chairs, at a real table, having witnessed everything. She turned back to me and her mouth opened. Nothing came out. For the first time in my entire life, my mother had no prepared line. And in the silence where her next move should have been, a chair scraped back at table 11. They stood up, all 3 of them, not to create a scene, not to confront anyone, but simply to be on their feet when I crossed the room to them, the way you stand for someone arriving at a gate after a very long journey. Rosa stood first because Rosa does everything first, then Claire, then Leo, catching his knee on the table in his hurry. They didn't say a word to my parents, they didn't need to. Their standing said everything that needed to be said. The restaurant had gone quiet around us, the particular hush of strangers who can feel that something real is happening and have stopped pretending not to witness it. A waiter froze mid-step with a tray. A couple at the next table had stopped talking entirely. And I walked past my mother, who was still half-turned in her chair. Past Linda, whose mouth had finally run out of the word blood. Past my father, who raised his eyes to me as I passed and then looked away, choosing comfort, one final time. 15 feet, 3 tables, 25 years. When I reached them, Rosa took my face in both her hands, exactly the way Ruth used to, and Claire pulled back the empty 4th chair, the one they had asked the host to set even though their reservation was for 3, and said the words she had written under her name in that first letter. The ones I had read until the paper went soft. "We saved you a seat," she said. "We always did." And I sat down in it. In the seat that had been waiting my entire life at the table that had wanted me before it ever knew for certain I would come. That was when my mother lost the one thing she had never once lost in front of other people. Her composure. I heard the chair scrape, I heard her stand, I heard the carefully maintained surface she had worn all evening crack straight down the middle. After everything we provided for you, she said, and it wasn't quiet anymore. It traveled across the dining room, sharp and climbing. After everything we gave you, the years, the home, the education, you do this to us in public. You humiliate your family over a piece of paper. Heads turned openly now. A man at the bar set down his drink. Linda was pulling at Carol's sleeve, hissing something about people watching. But Carol was past the reach of her own handler for the first time in her life, because the script was gone, and all she had left was the truth arriving sideways. We gave you everything, she said to a room full of strangers who owed her nothing. And I noticed she said gave, not loved. Even now, cornered, the word love would not come, because it had never been in the inventory. I stayed in my seat at table 11. I didn't rise to match her. I didn't raise my voice. Claire's hand had found mine under the table, and I held it and let Carol be loud, because the loudness was doing my work for me. Every person in that restaurant was watching a calm young woman sitting quietly with people who clearly adored her, while a furious older woman across the room shouted about everything she had paid for. And there is not a human being alive who hears a parent screaming about investment are. Earns and thinks, ah, there is the real family. My father never stood, he put his face in his hands. I let my mother run out of words the way a storm runs out of rain. And when the quiet returned, I did one last thing before I gave the rest of my birthday to the people who had earned it. I stood, walked the 3 tables back to the front, and set a single page on the white cloth in front of her, the trust's distribution schedule, face up. I didn't need it anymore. My attorney had the originals. You can keep that one, I said. You'll want to understand what ended tonight and what didn't. She stared at the page. Dennis reached for it, then didn't. And I looked at the two of them, my mother, who had priced me at 1 candle for 25 years, and my father, who had loved his own mother enough to grieve her but not enough to honor what she'd asked of him, and I said the one sentence I had prepared in advance. The one I'd written in my head in the parking lot and decided I would only use if I earned it. You kept me for the benefits, I said. They kept a seat for me. Then I turned around and walked back to table 11. I did not look behind me, not once, not when Linda called my name, not when Carol said something I chose not to hear. I sat back down beside Claire. Rosa had ordered me a slice of the chocolate cake while I was gone. Leo had found the small votive candle from the center of the table and stood it upright in the frosting. 1 candle. The symmetry of it caught in my throat. Then Claire leaned close and said, "Blow it out, sweetheart, make your wish." And I realized I didn't have one. I already had everything I'd been wishing for. The trust did exactly what Ruth had built it to do. On my 25th birthday, the caregiver distributions to Dennis and Carol Callahan ended on the date, and by the terms Ruth had notarized 2 years before she died. The remainder passed to me through the bank trustee, untouched by the will my parents had spent money revising, because you cannot disinherit someone from a trust you don't control. Their waiver, unsigned, was worth exactly what it had always been worth. Within the year, my parents sold the house on Aldrin Street. Without the distributions, they could no longer carry it. They moved somewhere smaller. I'm told Linda was furious to learn that none of Ruth's money would be flowing toward Marcus after all. The story of that dinner traveled the way these stories do, through the extended family and then past it. And the version where Carol is a devoted mother wronged by an ungrateful daughter never quite took root, because too many strangers in that restaurant had watched a woman scream about everything she'd paid for while a quiet young woman sat holding hands with the family across the room. I didn't file anything, I didn't post anything. I simply stopped answering. I let the silence be the boundary. It is the only kind that ever holds. My father sent me a text a few weeks later, 3 words. I am sorry. No follow-up, no name. When I didn't reply, I never replied. I heard later that when Linda tried to organize a challenge to Ruth's trust, it was Dennis who quietly shut it down, told them that his mother had every right to leave her estate where she chose, that it was hers, that it was finished. He was right. He was also, as always, a year too late, saying the right thing to the wrong room at the moment when it cost him nothing and changed nothing. That was my father entirely, a man who knew the right thing, even felt it, and could only bring himself to say it once, saying it required nothing of him. I didn't need the apology, but I was glad in a small, clean way that he had finally been correct out loud. I spent that first real birthday eating chocolate cake at table 11 with people who got absolutely nothing from wanting me. I have spent every birthday since with them. Claire and I talk every Sunday now at 4 o'clock, the hour I used to save for Ruth. Rosa taught me her grilled cheese recipe. Leo still sends memes. And somewhere in a kitchen drawer at my real family's house, there is a photo album that no longer closes properly because it finally has enough pages. Being useful was all my first parents ever wanted from me. Being wanted was the one thing I had never had. And it took me 25 years and one terrible dinner to learn that anyone who keeps you only for what you provide has already told you, in the plainest language available, that they were never your family at all. That's my story. One candle for 24 years. And on the 25th, a whole table that lit them all without being asked. If someone in your life only shows up when you're useful, let this be your reminder to stop auditioning for a seat you already deserve. You don't have to earn the people who love you. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight, drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Still Standing Stories, Quiet Tea. Root-a-life family narratives about dignity, boundaries, and the moment someone stopped shrinking to fit a seat they were never offered.